Welcome, folks. I'm seeing people starting to arrive, very punctual. Welcome. You're in the right place. If the topic on screen is what you're here for, you're in the right place. We'll give it a couple more minutes before we kick off. Give some folk a time to join in. Hello, joiners. Welcome to those who have joined. We'll be kicking off in just another minute. All right. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Cloud Pathway. Tonight we've got a great topic of conversation around Microsoft workloads in the cloud. So welcome. Joining us tonight we have it's Cloud Pathway number 10. This is exciting. We're into double figures now. So welcome to our two talks. We've got two speakers tonight, and then we'll have a fireside chat. And we would urge you to participate in that. Think up some questions or some interesting observations or anecdotes that are relevant to the subjects at hand. This session is being recorded. You'll have heard the lady tell you that when you joined. Your cameras are disabled, we cannot see you, and your microphones are disabled, we cannot hear you. But if you have any questions you want me to put to the panelists, then just submit them through the Q&A. There should be a Q&A panel that you can type your questions in. I will curate those and put them to our panelists later. So there's no need to mute yourselves, you're muted already. We do, if any of these subjects that we're discussing tonight, if any of these things seem relevant to you in your jobs, if you think these are relevant to problems you're facing in work, then do please reach out to us. We'll give you some consultancy advice. We'll have an initial chat with you, free, gratis, and for nothing. So do reach out to us to book some chat time with our consultants. And of course, we're on the usual social channels on LinkedIn and on the tweets. You can hear Cloudsoft's views on many things to do with cloud. Got a great lineup tonight. We've got John from AWS. He's going to be talking about his experiences taking Microsoft to the AWS customer community and helping them run their Microsoft workloads on the AWS cloud platform, which is news that comes as a surprise to many, certainly many people that we've spoken to at Cloudsoft, that AWS is actually a really comfortable home for Microsoft workloads. So he'll be going first. We've got a great presentation from him. And following that up, we'll have our very own Alan Sage. He's our VP of Engineering. And he will be, again, talking about using and choosing cloud to host your Microsoft workloads. And then following that, we hope to get more interactive, get some of you guys asking questions. We'll have a fireside chat with both of these speakers, and I will be on hand to moderate that and keep the conversation, hopefully keep the questions coming. So don't hold back, don't be shy. Use the Q&A panel to submit your burning thoughts. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to John first, and he is going to give an AWS presentation on running Microsoft workloads in the cloud. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Alistair. So I will just share my screen so you can see my presentation, and hopefully you can see that okay. Can you see that okay?
Yep, that's coming through perfectly, John.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, evening, everybody. It's great to see so many of you here. And my name is John Noakes. I'm ready for all the Blue Peter jokes, by the way. I've heard them all over the years. But many of you might be too young to remember him, but maybe there's some of you that do remember that name. So I'm not him. So I am a partner development specialist at AWS, focusing specifically on Windows workloads. And so my job is I work with Cloudsoft to help them migrate and modernize Microsoft workloads on AWS. So this presentation I'm going to give now will walk you through our strategy, our messaging, and some of the advantages. And as Alistair said there, some of these things might be a surprise to you. Some of you might already know that AWS is a potential destination for your Windows Server and SQL Server workloads and the applications that live on them. Some of you might think, well, how's that? That's going to be something quite different. We've not heard this before. So without further ado, I'll launch into this, and you will get copies of the slides afterwards. And it's been recorded as well, as you know. So yeah, you'll get access to the recording. So I thought I would start with some big picture stuff just to put it in context. And, you know, it's interesting when we look at the speed with which cloud transformation is happening. We are seeing many, many reports from many analysts, this from Flexera, from the State of the Cloud report, talking about what percentage of enterprises are expecting cloud usage to exceed what they previously thought they would before COVID-19. So what we're seeing is, because of the pandemic, disastrous though it is, there are new opportunities to utilize and take advantage of the cloud. And actually, when we look at enterprise applications and the data that lives within them, that is a really, really big transformation challenge. And what we're seeing here is over half of those workloads and data expecting to be in cloud within the next year. These are big numbers, and they're certainly bigger than we saw before the pandemic arrived. So in a strange way, the pandemic has accelerated cloud adoption. Here at AWS, we focus on what we call enterprise strategic workloads, and you see them on the chart here. And what we see from our own statistics as well as external sources, and you see that on the chart there, right across this board, Microsoft, SAP, VMware, Oracle, and mainframe, the areas that these workloads are running in cloud are touching many, many transactional systems. These are statistics that cause us at AWS to ask questions, to understand what opportunity we have to help customers who are running these workloads run them in AWS. And this is not like we're just starting this today. We've been doing this for a few years. And when you look at our track record and where we are today on these strategic workloads, when we look at Microsoft, which is my area of speciality, we host twice as many Windows Server instances in AWS than any other cloud provider. And that's quite a surprise for a lot of people, but we've been doing this for 13 years. And we've built up a strong track record, a lot of customers, and a lot of success stories, some of which you're going to hear about in this presentation. And you can see from the other strategic workloads there what sort of advantages we are now delivering in the AWS cloud. But the focus of today is Microsoft workloads. And the way we look at it is there are two main motions, really, the migration and the modernization of those applications that live on those workloads. And when we talk about what we call workload renovation, I think it's quite an interesting term because we know that our customers want to do more with less. They want to accelerate their digital transformation strategies. And one of the ways to do that is to identify candidates and targets that are worthwhile migrating to the cloud. Because if you migrate those applications and platforms to the cloud, you will be able to free up resources. The cost model is very, very significant. I'll come back to that in a few moments. The opportunity to get access to compute, database, storage, networking, and a bunch of other services on demand is very, very attractive. And with AWS now going over 200 cloud native services, we have the largest, the widest, and the deepest portfolio of cloud services in the world today. And when we look at migrations themselves, the way that we approach migrations to help our customers are through these key areas. Doing an assessment up front so that we and Cloudsoft as our partner can help understand your current environment in the best way possible to get ready for a migration. Its preparation is everything, and the opportunity to do that assessment as accurately as possible to deliver a right-sized cost business case to deliver that migration is what that's about. And once you have migrated, it doesn't stop there, of course, because then the operation of that migrated environment and how you can further optimize both the infrastructure and the technical optimization and the cost optimization through licensing savings is critical. If we flip the coin and think about modernization, so you've migrated your Microsoft workloads to the cloud, that's a great first step. But to make even further savings and to deliver more innovation and to be more agile, we really want to be looking at modernization. Why would you want to do that? Because as you can see on the chart here, breaking down monolithic legacy applications into microservices, which are faster, cheaper, and more innovative, is an opportunity that many, many organizations want to take advantage of. And we've been working with Cloudsoft for a while now to help you do that. And they have some deep skills on being able to do this, which you'll hear about later. So our customers from all around the world are saying to us, well, we have a lot of questions about running Microsoft in AWS. And here's an example of some of them. And it's no accident, I suppose, that the question in the largest font there is, how does Microsoft licensing work on AWS? Because very often we can technically prove the business case to run those Windows Server and SQL Server instances in AWS, but it's only really going to hit home if there's a cost advantage to doing it. So many of these questions we address on a daily basis, and we haven't got time on this webinar to go into all of them, but I do hope to touch on some of them. Because when we look at the migration trends for Windows workloads, you can see, again, some numbers here. I don't need to read the slide out to you, but you can see here that there is a lot of momentum. There's a big expectation, and many of those Windows workloads that are still on premise today will be moving to the cloud in the next 2 years. So when we stand back and look at the big picture, you, our customers, have a number of competing priorities on your mind. And I'm sure all of you will recognize all of these 8 things. They're on everybody's radar, some more than others. But the one that is probably going to get your attention most, for all the right reasons, is the one that's just lit up in orange there, cost reduction. Yeah, all of this modern and fantastic and cloud-enabled stuff is great, but will it help me drive down my cost? And let's, by the way, understand the difference between price, cost, and value. They're 3 different things, but the relationship between them is very important. And when it comes to cost reduction, it's a core principle that's very close to AWS's heart. And when we make statements, we always back them up with evidence. And when we look at this from our cloud economics benchmarks, we see that there is ample evidentiary proof from all around the world with thousands of customers that we can reduce cost. On the left-hand side there, you see the reduction in overall infrastructure spend, and then the reduction in spend per user before and after moving to AWS. And on the right-hand side, we see further cost reductions growing as customers mature and start accessing even more services. So not only can we reduce your cost on day one, but we'll continue to drive down that cost and allowing you to spend some of those savings you've made on more innovative, faster moving and digital services. So in the Microsoft environment, we have 4 main use cases, I would say. Numbers 1 and 2 on the left-hand side of the chart are about migrations. Call it lift and shift at its most simplest. But in both of these areas, migrating a Windows Server VM to AWS is job 1 for a lot of people. Sitting alongside that, optimizing SQL Server to Amazon to AWS EC2, or consuming that as a service with RDS, the relational database service for SQL Server, is an option as well. So, excuse me, we have a lot of activity on numbers 1 and 2 all around the world. And numbers 3 and 4 on the right-hand side of the chart are more to do with modernization. So what do you do with those workloads once you've put them into the AWS cloud? Well, the opportunity to save money even more by refactoring, replatforming, containerizing those applications, particularly .NET applications, is what modernization is all about. But it doesn't stop there. It's also about modernizing the database as well. And our most successful customers that do this well have proven capability, which you'll see in a moment with some case studies, that cost reduction helps them be more innovative and drive much faster and much deeper digital services. So we will say, and we do say, that Windows on AWS is the most popular, the most secure, and the most reliable cloud for Windows. And we never make statements or claims without being able to back them up. And when we look at the customers we have all around the world that have chosen AWS as their cloud of choice for Windows and SQL workloads, the list goes on. These are just some of the main ones. But here's an example of a customer that's really taken some advantage here, Thomson Reuters. We took this as an opportunity to standardize and do some operating system upgrades, improving our overall security posture. Coming out of 7 data centers, 12,000 servers, 400 applications, 5 months ahead of schedule. It was easier, faster, and cheaper than they expected. And this quote here from Hess Corporation is well worth looking at, because when you look at what Bill Roth has said here, we haven't met a Windows workload that we can't run in AWS and run better, including Windows servers with 0 downtime. So we have a lot of evidence of customers succeeding with those Microsoft migrations to AWS. So why did customers choose us as their destination? There are 5 key parameters here, and you see it on the chart. I'm not going to read all the numbers out, but I'll call a couple of them out. When you look at the number of years that AWS have been running Microsoft workloads, even before Microsoft Azure arrived, we've got experience, we've got expertise, we've learned a lot. And because the depth and breadth of our services and the reliability we deliver backs that up, there are very few reasons to not think about AWS as a destination for Microsoft workloads. Our operational expertise, which should never be underestimated, extends to the global infrastructure, the way we run it, where we run it, and how we run it. We now have 24 regions around the world with 77 availability zones, 230 data centers, and we've now started delivering local zones at the moment in the US. But you can see the numbers in red there where we are continuing to grow around the world. So delivering that operational expertise at that level is really, really important. And the way in which our infrastructure is built and structured around the regions and availability zones, each availability zone will contain at least 2 and usually 3 data centers. And the way that we structure that is a critical differentiator for the AWS cloud. And that differentiation comes through in the reliability of our service. You see here some public figures from Cloud Harmony on how our service provision compares against the next largest cloud provider. So we're very proud of this. We will continue to drive these metrics as best we can. And it's an area that you as a customer have to feel strongly about. It is a requirement. That cloud service has to be reliable. It has to be available. You have to have minimum, if no, disruptions. And I'm saying that on the back of yesterday's outage from Fastly, of course. So it's right in the headlights, this subject at the moment. When it comes to SQL Server, we've recently used an organization called Principal Technologies to run a benchmark test. It's a TPC-like OLTP workload. And they tested on our behalf a SQL Server instance running on an EC2, on AWS EC2 with an R5B performance. And what we found was running that against the nearest Azure VM in performance size and opportunity, we found a twice greater performance increase at a 62% lower cost. So doing more for less based on new orders per minute with a publicly published benchmark. And you can click on the slide here when you get them to look at our blog post on this, as well as the source. And there is a 35-page technical document which goes into fine detail on how this benchmark was conducted. So we're very proud of that. It's very much up to date. It's just been published in the last couple of months. So I would encourage you to look at that. If you have any doubts or concerns that SQL Server will not deliver the same price performance in AWS as it does in another cloud, read this report. When we look at the innovation and the experience we've had over those 13 years, we have delivered many, many services specific to Windows workloads, spread across Windows Server, SQL, .NET applications, and .NET application modernization. And actually, when you look at that and the work that we've done, what that means is that right now we have a history of not only innovating on Microsoft workloads with AWS, but we have over 360 Microsoft-centric services in the AWS portfolio today. So whatever area of Microsoft core infrastructure that you're looking at, we've probably done something with it. Typically, our customers will progress on this sort of journey. I'm sure many of you have seen simple charts like this before, but sometimes simple is very good. Sometimes it gets the point across very well. We usually look at a 4-stage journey, assessing the scenario up front, getting you started on that migration whilst continually optimizing that migrated environment, both from an infrastructure point of view and from a cost point of view. And ultimately, the real destination to drive down that technical debt and increase the efficiency and the speed is modernization. So we have a vast range of tools, services, and prescriptive architecture guidance to help you at any stage on that journey, whether you're assessing, whether you're getting ready for the migration by mobilizing and planning that, or when you actually come to do the work itself and migrate and modernize. And Cloudsoft are very, very familiar with these tools. And because I'm here today with Cloudsoft, I have no hesitation whatsoever in recommending that you speak to Cloudsoft about these areas, because that's why we have Windows workload partners that are very specific to the skill that's needed to do this work. And Cloudsoft are part of a very, very small number of partners worldwide with AWS who have that capability. One of the key things that we offer in conjunction with Cloudsoft is the AWS optimization and licensing assessment. So this is a prescriptive and strategically important opportunity for you to have Cloudsoft and AWS at no cost to you undertake an assessment that will deliver a right-sized business case. And the reason we do this is because we know that many of our customers have a challenge understanding what the real footprint is. What have I got across all my servers, my workstations, the instances? The OLA will identify everything in that environment, regardless of platform, regardless of application, or regardless of where it sits. You want to know what to move. You want to know the utilization of your IT estate, what's underutilized, what's running at peak capacity, what's heavily virtualized, what are the old servers that are perhaps going out of support. This analysis will help you understand how to right size based on actual resource consumption. How much is it going to cost you? There are so many options here that the licensing specific on Microsoft and Windows licensing Do I bring my own license? Do I buy license included? What about dedicated hosts? The opportunity here is to get a very structured and evidence-backed report that explains to you how to do that migration. So the OLA is a very, very powerful tool in the AWS kit bag that Cloudsoft can help you take advantage of. Here's an example of some success. We have a customer here who completed an OLA a couple of years back now, but we found in the OLA that the average utilization of the CPU was less than 5%. Look at the RAM utilization, look at the storage. So this customer was paying a lot of money for assets that were very, very lightly used. They didn't know that until the OLA was done. So the first thing we do with these things is do a direct match. So of all that CPU, of all that memory, of all that storage you've got on-prem, how much would it cost to run that in AWS? And the like for like direct match was $21 million. But that's not optimized. That's not right-sized. The optimized cost was $7 million because the customer was able to use a mixture of licensing strategies for reserved instances, license included, bring your own license and dedicated hosts. And look at the impact on the SQL Server licensing. Driving down the enterprise licenses and the cores. Why use enterprise when you can use standard? The performance of SQL standard on AWS will very often match what you are doing already, because one of the things we can run here is a tool to explain to you how much of that SQL Server enterprise functionality are you actually using. So this case study says a lot about the success of the licensing assessment. And on SQL Server, these 6 differentiators are really right at the very core of our proposition. Lowering that cost, delivering better performance, giving you flexibility with licensing, make it easy to migrate and run and operate, getting benefit from the advantages we've got of running these workloads for many years, and the services that we offer that deliver security and identity are much deeper, much wider than any other cloud provider. When it comes to making the migration move itself, we have to reduce the complexity, and we have tools and opportunities to help you do that with automation, whether it's sizing, configuring, deploying SQL Server. And Cloudsoft are very, very familiar with all of these tools. There are almost too many tools for you to worry about. Give Cloudsoft that job. They will help you deliver that migration and reduce the complexity. The final piece of the puzzle, really, for today at least, is modernization. So what do we mean by modernization? Well, Gartner have recently come out with a survey that says, look at that, 84% of their customers that they asked agreed or strongly agreed that application modernization is a high priority. Why is that? It's because it helps me do more with less. IDC research there. Lift and shift, yeah, it's fine as a step one, but it's inhibiting users from taking full advantage of the flexibility of cloud. So modernization is a very, very big subject and a very topical subject. When we talk about modernizing Windows workloads at AWS, this is what we mean. We mean moving Windows Server to Linux, utilizing containers, utilizing serverless technologies like Lambda. We mean moving SQL Server on Windows to SQL Server on Linux, or even better, removing SQL Server altogether and moving to a cloud-native open source database service like Amazon Aurora, which is the fastest growing service in AWS history at 1/10 of the cost and twice the performance of SQL Server. And we also talk about modernizing .NET applications and .NET framework to .NET Core, and moving that .NET environment into microservices and utilizing containers. So modernizing Windows workloads for us is a very, very fast-moving and real possibility. And we don't mind whether that source workload is already in AWS, or whether it's on premises, or it's in another cloud. You can put absolute faith in Cloudsoft being able to get hold of that workload and modernize it for you. And here's an example of a customer who's taken advantage of that. Dow Jones, we all know who they are. Look at what these guys did. They cut costs by over 50% because they modernized their on-premise SQL Server solutions to Amazon Aurora. They have no more SQL. Everything runs on Aurora. Cut their costs in half. And when you look at an organization like that, with the mission criticality of their services, you'd better make sure that that database service performs. So some great examples there. Licensing, when you bring Microsoft licensing to AWS, we have flexibility and options. You can buy license included instances from us, or you can bring your existing licenses to AWS. It's a big subject, it's a complex subject, but the opportunity here to do what's right for you and manage those licenses with something we call AWS License Manager, which will give an automated discovery of all your usage for Windows Server, SQL, and Oracle. And there will be more environments coming in License Manager in the future. This is a free service. It's in every AWS management console, and we want to see customers taking advantage of it. Finally, we're very proud of this. You might have seen it. For the 10th consecutive year, Gartner have placed us in the top right of the leaders quadrant in cloud services and cloud infrastructure and platform services. So we know that we're performing well. We're not going to rest on our laurels. There's more to come, but I hope that gives you an opportunity to then now I'll pass across to Aled and we'll go deeper into how Cloudsoft can help you with the principles and the strategies I've just talked about. Aled.
I'll jump in for a second, John. That was fabulous. Really enjoyed that. It's not the first time I've seen, let me put my camera back on. Not the first time I've seen a lot of those data points, but you just keep adding and adding more graphs, more charts, more data points, more customer testimonials. It's great to see. I'm still not seeing any Q&A coming in from the attendees. Don't hold back. I'm sure there's lots of neurons firing in response to the material that's been presented so far. Do feel free to open the Q&A panel and pop in some questions you'd like our panelists to answer. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Aled, VP of Engineering at Cloudsoft, who's going to talk about the subject that's on screen now. Over to you, Aled.
Okay, thanks, John and Alistair. So this is very much not a sales pitch. I'm going to instead try to give a fairly balanced discussion about the right choice of cloud for your Microsoft workloads. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes talking about this. So I'll cover very briefly why move to the cloud. Don't want to preach the converted too much, but not everybody is converted, and certainly there are some use cases where cloud is not the right answer. I'll spend the bulk of the time comparing the cloud providers, and hopefully that's useful for people who are already in the cloud as well as those considering a migration. So why move to the cloud? I think the biggest reason is that agility and faster innovation. It allows you to focus on delivering value rather than under differentiated heavy lifting. So stop doing the sort of tasks that don't actually add business value, differentiate from your customers, focus on your applications, your features, take advantage of the way that you can spin up environments to experiment and test really quickly, that you can spin these up on demand and get features into the hands of customers faster. And cloud is a great enabler for that. Cost obviously matters massively to everyone. John showed some great graphs that showed the cost reduction that people are seeing with that. I think it's really important to note, though, we're not just comparing the AWS bill with your on-prem bill. What we really care about is the total cost of ownership. So it's far more than that. It's also thinking about how much does it really cost you to have database administrators who are managing those individual servers or the cabling or worrying about how to manage that level of infrastructure. So what is the total cost of ownership of that compared to switching to a managed service and handing that over to a cloud provider who, through economies of scale and expertise, can manage these things brilliantly? There's also an amazing set of tools in the toolbox to choose from that can be used to improve security, operations, as well as enhanced applications, like whether you're looking for machine learning or IoT, there's so many services to choose from to help you build these applications faster. So which cloud? Any of the major cloud providers will work well for you. They've all got a lot of happy customers. AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud are all in the Gartner's Magic Quadrant, with AWS as the leader for the 10th consecutive year, as John said. The investment from each of these is huge. They each spend tens of billions of dollars a year. So it's incredibly hard to compete and to catch up with those economies of scale for the folk who are in that bottom left quadrant. And also, frankly, for companies, so are you going to manage your database as well as AWS could? So certainly that's true for some companies who have huge requirements and huge levels of expertise, but for others, handing that over to those experts makes more sense. But the right choice of cloud involves more than just looking at the merits of each technology and so on. So let's talk about the bigger picture first. So an important first question is, are you already using a cloud provider? And if so, it probably makes sense to build on that. Of course, when we say using a cloud provider, we mean the core cloud services. We don't just mean using an online service from that provider. So on that note, Microsoft have done an amazing marketing job at branding things as Azure. So for example, Office 365, Azure DevOps, Azure AD. However, Azure there is really an umbrella term of a lot of technologies. Using those ones I've listed doesn't give you much experience of the core cloud services. They do integrate nicely with those other Azure services, but they also integrate nicely with other cloud providers. So choosing a cloud provider goes way beyond just, am I using any of those SaaS offerings from Azure or G Suite or whatever it might be, and thinking beyond that. Okay, what about multi-cloud strategy? So as in using core cloud services from both AWS and Azure, for example. So that certainly makes sense for some companies. Some enterprises are too big to fail. They need to avoid putting all their eggs in one basket. They've got compliance reasons for doing this. Some companies, through mergers and acquisitions, have things running in different clouds, and they have deep expertise to continue doing that. And again, that makes a lot of sense. For a lot of medium-sized enterprises, though, it often makes better sense to become really good at using one cloud provider rather than spreading your knowledge too thinly. There's really great ways to build highly reliable applications on each cloud provider. So next, do you have in-house expertise already? And is that knowledge widespread and deep? So by this we mean, do you have teams who have really built cloud-based applications and operated them in production? There's a lot to learn to do this, and it's different on each cloud provider. And where there are gaps in that knowledge, how easy is it to fill them? So how easy is it to recruit and to retain staff? There's also an ecosystem of partners available who can help. So John's already done a great advert for Cloudsoft talking about our capabilities there, so I won't labor that point. So often the choice is bigger than just those first applications as well, or that one team. So what other applications are there that your company will be thinking about? You need to think about the bigger picture there. And on that note, are there any special capabilities that this brings in? So some of those services, such as machine learning, are very different across different cloud providers. Other services, there are rough equivalents in terms of being able to run VMs, being able to run containers, being able to run serverless, different storage options, and so on. So in terms of choosing that cloud provider, yeah, are there any sort of more niche capabilities you need? Also, are there dependencies between your applications? So for example, if your data warehouse is in one place and there's lots of data transfer going in and out of that data warehouse, then it might make sense to co-locate applications with that. You get charged for data egress by all the big cloud providers for transferring data out of that cloud provider's region. This can add up to some big costs. Of course, your long-term plans might trump that. So some companies have spent several years moving off their huge Oracle databases. You might architect for the future rather than making decisions based on those legacy data warehouse solutions that you have in place now. So let's drill into some of the details there, comparing cloud providers. So I'll focus this comparison on Azure and AWS. So Azure are doing a great job catching up, but it still is catching up. AWS are still in the lead. We saw that in the Gartner Magic Quadrant earlier, which covers the overall vision and the ability to execute. But perhaps surprisingly, we're going to reach the same conclusion for Microsoft-based workloads. But let's drill into some of those areas. So experience and maturity, given that this is a major selling point, I think not surprising, John's already said this, that AWS have been running cloud-based Windows VMs and Microsoft workloads for longer than any other cloud provider. They've got twice as many Windows VMs as Azure. It's also interesting to see that Azure are actually running more Linux VMs than they run Windows VMs. So it's not a given that the creators of Windows will be the best at operating Windows and SQL Server. It's a very different skill set to operate versus to actually build the products. So Andy Jassy, the ex-CEO of AWS, was famously asked, are Microsoft catching up? And he answered, there's no compression algorithm for experience. You can't learn certain lessons without going through the curve. So there are some things you can compress and learn from. So Microsoft has done a great job releasing excellent services in Azure, learning from AWS. The developer experience is really good on Azure, learning from many of the popular DevOps tools and practices. But for things like operations, scalability, reliability, these are really hard problems for a cloud provider. The level of scale and reliability we're looking for them is huge. Like whatever we build on top of these cloud providers, it can really only be as good as the cloud provider is offering. And AWS have learned a huge amount since 2006 running hyperscale public cloud services reliably. Also, as Andy Jassy said at a summit, like AWS has grown up as part of Amazon, which is a high volume, low margin business, and other providers just don't think that way. It's also worth noting about the market leader, AWS. There's more people out there with many years of AWS experience. So recruiting is generally going to be easier to find and retain people who are experts at developing and operating applications in AWS. So what about cloud reliability? Again, not surprising that John has called this out, that Azure had 7 times the number of outage hours as AWS had. And that reflects AWS's expertise that built up over the years of how to operate things at scale reliably. There's also some big differences as well in terms of things like the approach to regions. So within AWS, you have this concept of availability zone. So that is a cluster of data centers. A region is then comprised of at least 3 availability zones, and each of these is miles apart, which gives you the disaster recovery guarantees that you need for compliance reasons and so on. Compare that with Azure, which is in some ways winning the race for the greatest number of regions, but some of those regions are actually just Microsoft buying some co-location space in somebody else's data center. Some regions are a single data center operated by Microsoft, and some of them are actually multiple data centers. So look very carefully at which regions you're thinking of using from Microsoft to make sure that you're choosing ones that have that level of resilience, also have the capacity required. So particularly when the pandemic kicked off and there was suddenly a complete shift in requirements for cloud computing, there were some high profile cases of Microsoft regions running out of space. Also, this impacts the way that we build resilient applications. So Azure, we need to build things with cross-region if we want to get high availability properly, whereas in AWS, we can do this as cross-availability zone, or if we really want 5 nines reliability, then cross-region. And that actually simplifies the way that we build applications in AWS. Okay, let's speed up a little bit and let's talk about the range of features and benefits. So each of those cloud providers has a huge range of services and features. In 1 year, there were about 1,000 new capabilities added by Azure. And in that same year, AWS released 1,900 features and services, with 90% of those driven directly by customer feature requests. But of course, any given customer is only going to use a tiny fraction of those services and features. Generally, I wouldn't choose one cloud provider over another based on some niche features. They're both adding new features at an impressive rate. What about developer experience? So this is somewhere where the compression algorithm for experience argument doesn't apply as much. You can learn a lot from others and from their past mistakes. And I'd say that AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud all make developing and deploying your code to the cloud straightforward once you know how to use those services. You can also mix and match really well. So there's third-party tools out there, CI/CD tools. For example, if you choose VSTS or Azure DevOps for continuous integration and continuous delivery, then you can choose whichever target to deploy to, whether that's Azure or AWS or Google Cloud. What about Microsoft licensing? So John's already covered quite a few of those bits there. Like, my take is, like, frankly, given that Microsoft control the licensing terms and conditions, it's stacked to be more favorable in Azure, at least in some circumstances. Saying that, there are advantages on AWS as well. Like, for example, with SQL Server, you can reduce license costs by taking advantage of the low latency between those availability zones I mentioned, which gives some better architectural options that can result in lower costs. In Azure, there are advantages as well. So the Azure hybrid benefits is something where Microsoft changed the licensing terms on the 1st of October 2019, and this has impacts as to where you can use licenses. So do be careful, use the license analysis tool that John talked about. But it also means that you can use your on-prem licenses in Azure, which can save a lot of money for some of your customers, at least in the short term. But then often that saving is only during the initial transition phase, after which, like, why would you have those on-prem licenses in the first place anyway? What about modernization to get the most out of the cloud? Well, again, both AWS and Azure are really strong when it comes to this. You can change how you compute runs, move to containers or even serverless. You can switch to cloud managed services, for example, your SQL Server databases. You can modernize your application to escape licensing costs, for example, running .NET Core and Linux rather than Windows, or moving off SQL Server to alternative databases. Lots of options there. Add cost. So it's surprisingly hard to predict cost. There's a lot of advantages to on-demand pricing, but also downsides. Your bill will depend massively on day-to-day usage patterns, and particularly if you build something that's in a cloud-native way that's dynamic, auto-scaling, and so on. But if we do try to compare AWS and Azure costs, frankly, they're pretty similar. Each will be slightly cheaper for different circumstances. Looking at the Microsoft Azure website, though, they make some bold claims. For example, that AWS is 5 times expensive for Windows Server. Now, that comparison makes some big assumptions, so you're unlikely to see those numbers for your use cases. So it assumes that you already have licenses, you continue to pay Microsoft out of a different budget from the one that we're talking about in the comparison, and that includes software assurance. And this lets you reuse those licenses in Azure. And that also restricts you from using it on AWS Share Tenancy VMs, which is where they're then trying to make the comparison. So they've also chosen this for Windows 2003 or 2008, and therefore assumed that you need to buy the extended security updates in AWS, but not in Azure. So if you're using more recent Windows versions, and if you're looking at other licensing options, then the cost, frankly, will be pretty much the same. So to me, that 5 times cost comparison is actually an advert for modernization. Upgrade to your version of Windows and you immediately save 40%. Or even better, move to .NET running on Linux and save 80% of your costs. So you no longer have to buy those Windows licenses, which probably came from some other part of the company's budget that wasn't shown in Microsoft's comparison. So in conclusion, as I said, any of the cloud providers you can get to work well for you. Each of them has a lot of very happy customers. But don't assume just because you're using Microsoft workloads that the cloud run by Microsoft is going to be the right choice. And don't assume that just because you're already using Azure AD or Azure DevOps, then it means you should use Azure for core cloud services. You can make that judgment call separately and judge each cloud on its merits for your context and your use cases. And remember that cloud is a journey. You don't want to just lift and shift and treat it like another data center. You'll want to modernize your applications to get the very full benefits of cloud. And that's me.
Aled, super job. Thank you. Thank you very much. Lots of thought-provoking stuff. I always get, my brain ties itself in knots when I try and think about licensing. I'll stick this guy back on screen just so that people are reminded where to find Cloudsoft on the webs. Very dismayed to see no Q&A. In the Q&A panel, I would encourage you to satisfy your curiosity for answers and submit some questions to our panel. But I think that's been a very thought-provoking pair of presentations. So let's dive into some of the consequences of some of the stuff you've been talking about. In the absence of questions from the audience, from the attendees, I can kick things off. One thing that occurs to me is that we occasionally work with enterprises, not just SMEs. We work with large enterprises, enterprise style customers, and the conversations we have with the application teams, if they're software companies, very different to the kinds of conversations we have with corporate IT. Corporate IT are focused on Office 365 and back office systems, or getting rid of Exchange and going for SaaS-based email and so on, OneDrive, Microsoft Dynamics, Azure AD. But the application teams, they've got a totally different set of requirements around using Shiny services to build applications. Aled, do you want to elaborate on the different perspectives of Microsoft within those two camps?
Yeah. So you're right. We increasingly see enterprises choosing one thing for corporate IT or enterprise IT and another thing for their product teams. And yeah, that's not surprising as the requirements are very different. So if we're thinking about a company who are already using Office, they're using AD, it's a natural thing to choose to use the SaaS offerings of those, to move to Office 365, to move to Azure AD, Microsoft Dynamics, OneDrive, and so on. To me, I would keep those as like a separate category from going, what does that mean in terms of using core cloud services? So in the same way as other companies we talk to who are more choosing, say, G Suite for email and Google Docs, I wouldn't recommend that they then naturally go to Google Cloud for running VMs just because they're using G Suite. It's the same argument here. So those corporate IT folk, it's a very natural choice for them. And there's a temptation for them as well to view VMs as just black box VMs, because historically that's what corporate IT have done. Whereas then when we talk to people who are actually product owners, they're far more interested in that shiny toolbox of what can I do in the cloud? How do I build reliable applications in the cloud? And thinking about how efficient they can be in there. And that's where we see a lot of those application teams pushing for AWS. And that works absolutely fine together. Like things like, Azure AD working with AWS. It's a very common pattern.
Yeah, and I think, Alistair, just to build on what Aled said there's an interesting point, because what we are seeing from our customers all around the world is specifically on using managed AD as a service from AWS. So customers who are running the kind of Microsoft applications that Aled mentioned there, Office 365, could be Dynamics, whatever it is, managing the AD service that connects to those applications from the AWS cloud is a very, very attractive option, because it's kind of the bridge, if you will, the technical bridge between what we're running in the AWS cloud and what the customer is running somewhere else. So we are seeing, because that service is so easy to spin up and is very low cost and completely mirrors what you would be doing outside of AWS for managed Active Directory service. That's becoming very, very heavily used and very powerful. So yeah, it's an interesting aspect, because one of the things we see is there is a clear delineation and differentiation really between the core infrastructure, the platform, if you will, and the applications that sit on the platform, right? So the bridge between running, okay, we've talked about Windows Server, we've talked about Active Directory, we've talked about SQL Server. Of course, they are mission critical underlying infrastructure services, without which the apps won't run. But as Aled was saying there, as we're moving towards modernization and the focus starts to shift to the benefits associated with modernizing, then we're getting closer to the application. And as we all know, getting closer to the application is getting closer to your customers' mission critical, usually revenue generating key points. That's where we want to be.
Exactly.
Who cares about what it's running on?
Yep.
What you actually care about as a customer is it helping me make money? Is it helping me increase my efficiency? Am I doing more with less? So making that bridge between the underlying infrastructure and the apps that run on it, when it comes to Microsoft applications and infrastructure, we've got a very, very powerful proposition.
Yeah, you make a very good point there, John, about, as technologists, and I include myself in that, I love shiny technology. I love looking at photographs of data centers and seeing the flashy lights. But these things are not ends in themselves. They are means to an end. They exist solely to run apps that benefit the business. And we lose sight of that at our peril. And some of us are fortunate enough to work in spaces where we get to play with the shiny toys to build apps that deliver business value. But if they're not delivering business value, they have no role to play. Interesting about the directory, Microsoft has always been very clever that the directory gets its tentacles into everything. But there are other facets that people are now starting to consume as SaaS. And Aled, you mentioned Azure DevOps, the SaaS version of what used to be Visual Studio Tool Suite or Tool Server. I think it used to be called VSTS. How does this move to SaaS for certain critical things like the directory and authentication, or like your CI/CD pipeline? How does the move to SaaS impact the choice of cloud and where to run applications? John, you've touched on it in your previous points, I think, but SaaS adoption is on the rise, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think we're talking about the coming together here of a service that delivers for perhaps an ISV or someone who wants to expose a fee earning service to your customers, and the ability for developers, and actually, let's be honest, the speed and the capability that you need to develop new applications is nowhere near as complex as it used to be a few years ago. You do not have to be any longer steeped in C# and Visual Basic and all of those other wonderful things to design, develop, and deploy modern applications. It's become simpler. It's opened up the world of application development to almost to non-developers, right? It really is click and point. I don't want to oversimplify it too much because there is technical detail behind it. But from an AWS perspective, what we always want to deliver to our customers is simplicity, speed, and low cost. And actually, when you look at what we've done to bring customers who are already familiar and skilled in Microsoft development tools like Visual Studio, like Azure DevOps, you know what? You can use those tools and the skills you need to utilize them best in exactly the same way in the AWS cloud, because we've got tools, we can run that stuff in our cloud. But the advantage you're going to get is the connection of that newly developed application to the plethora of services for serverless, containers, Kubernetes type DevOps operations. We are very, very proud of the capability we have. And actually, when you look at all the containers that are running in the cloud today, everywhere across the world, 70% of that is running in AWS. Of all the containerized applications in the world today, we've got 70% of it running in AWS. And I think when you look at statistics like that, there's got to be a reason for that. And the key reason is simplicity, speed, and low cost. So the opportunity for organizations to understand how to design, develop, deploy, manage, and expand .NET applications. Going back to something I said earlier, the transformation from monolithic application stacks that require a lot of maintenance. And actually, we've all spoken to organizations where, oh, actually, the guys that developed that, they've left the company, they've gone, we daren't touch it. It's unmanageable. What are we going to do now? If something goes wrong, we're going to have to call that guy up. We don't know where he is. So the opportunity to modernize all of that and run faster is what it's all about. And
Yeah.
Aled, your comments will be very worthy there because you've got some experience of that area.
Yeah, completely. Like that moving to the cloud is just the first step, and it's enabling that modernization. And there's so many great options available for that. And it's also worth noting, coming back to what Alistair was asking about the SaaS part, like you're not tied to just choosing services from AWS if you chose an AWS or vice versa for Azure. Like we come across far more customers who are running on GitHub than who use AWS Code Commit, but that has no bearing on the choice of cloud. The fact that Microsoft bought GitHub doesn't matter. It integrates beautifully with all of the cloud providers. And in terms of that kind of modernization path, then choose those best of breed tools, including those from the wider ecosystem, based on what you're trying to do. Like if you want to improve your observability and improve that monitoring and your ability to diagnose problems, then yeah, you might well choose some of those native services from the cloud provider, but other things you might reach out to the likes of a Datadog or even a Honeycomb to really improve that level of observability you've got.
Yeah, horses for courses. Nice. We're kind of straying into territory that is touching on cloud adoption and migration. And it was interesting to see your mention of some of the material from the cloud adoption framework in the material you presented, John. But Aled, I'll start with you. I mean, obviously cloud adoption, cloud migration is a huge topic. We at Cloudsoft, we've published blog posts and white papers on the various different migration strategies, the 7 R's of migration, but like the 5 D's of dodgeball, right? But Aled, I'll start with you. What tips can you give for approaching cloud adoption, approaching cloud migration? Where should our listeners begin?
Yeah, so it very much depends upon like the style of applications you've got and the style of company you have. But in general, like the preparation, this is not just an IT project. So get buy-in from all the major stakeholders, get a group together to represent those different areas of the business. It's not just about the application owners. You also want to get security, who are going to be impacted by these choices, operations, finance team, who are suddenly going to get confronted with an entirely different style of billing, where they can no longer predict what that cost is going to be for the next month. They no longer get to have procurement deciding how much is going to be spent ahead of time. And then you've got legal and compliance and so on, and keep them all informed. Start with a lighthouse application. So choose one application that's going to be representative, get that team together who are going to be, those build up that cloud expertise. If you don't have cloud expertise in-house, bring in a partner who are experienced at this and decide, what is the most appropriate migration technique for this application. So are you going to lift and shift to the cloud and then subsequently modernize, or are you going to actually potentially do some replatforming, so decompose the application slightly, decide actually I've been running with an F5 box on-prem, there's no point in trying to set up a F5 virtual appliance in the cloud. Let's just go straight to using an application load balancer from that cloud provider. So yeah, those decisions really depend upon that application architecture and the nature of that application.
I'm a big fan of the Cloud Adoption Framework. It's one of AWS's thought leadership contributions to the state of the art. And I like that it has a structured path that, although the options are very unique to the consuming organization, having a slightly proceduralized path to follow is, I think, a very good thing for many organizations, particularly given that it starts with an assessment phase and then follows up with some gap analysis to help make the right decision for that organization in context. Have you got anything to add, John, since we're straying into Cloud Adoption Framework?
Yeah. I think the key thing I would just add to that commentary there, Alistair and Aled, is there's a common phrase, isn't there? Proper previous planning prevents poor performance. And that's a great way of summarizing this, because spending what can sometimes feel like an inordinate amount of time on the planning and preparation is always time well spent. In AWS, we have a very big program which is structured and prescriptive called the Migration Acceleration Program. And when you look at the MAP program, Migration Acceleration Program, it breaks down into 3 phases: assess, mobilize, and migrate. And we'd also include modernization in the migrate phase. But when you look at what's available and the way that we structure that, then the lion's share of the activity and the funding, because we provide a lot of funding to help accelerate that migration, is very front-end loaded. So doing a migration readiness assessment, doing the optimization licensing assessment that I talked about earlier, that is time well spent. And the really great thing is, for you as customers, you don't have to spend a penny on that. That is funded by AWS. And working with Cloudsoft to get you started on that would be a very, very attractive place to start. And just as Aled said, you don't know on day 1 or day 0, if we can call it that, which applications, which part of your infrastructure, which part of your environment is the best candidate to migrate to the cloud. So we're starting with that. It's a complete open door. Point us at the environment, and we'll use a variety of structured, very comprehensive tools to go and look at that environment. It's agent or agentless based environment, tool set, I should say, and interpreting the results with the cloud adoption framework, which underpins the whole process, and utilizing cloud economics modeling to make sure that what you actually migrate is going to be optimized in the best way. And of course, that all sounds great, but the heavy lifting is down to the tools that actually take you from A to B. And because we have a wide portfolio of migration tools, and this is where it comes back to, when you look at all the services that AWS have today, the key statistic I always like to share is that 90% of all the services that AWS build, and we released 2,500 new services last year, 2,500. 90% of all of those services are as a direct result of what you, our customers, have told us you need. We don't just develop stuff because we think we're clever and, hey, this would be cool. We develop things that you've asked us for. And that's an absolute core principle at AWS. So when it comes to migration, when it comes to modernization, when it comes to assessment, the tools that you are going to use and get from Cloudsoft working with AWS are tools that have been proven in the market to do what it says on the tin and more, in fact. So I think they're the useful backdrop, I hope, to the commentary there.
Mute. Thanks for that, John. That's some good insights there. We have a little over 5 minutes to go, so I'm going to ask one more question, but it's going to be in 2 parts. So we've spoken about modernizing apps, which I guess has a legacy flavor to it. So I'm going to ask about what do we do to modernize a legacy Microsoft-based application to take full advantage of the AWS platform? And the flip side to that question is, how does that differ from how we would approach greenfield? So building new applications on the platform. What does cloud first look like for Microsoft workloads, cloud first? But starting off with legacy. I'll start with you, Alad, and I'll give John the last word.
Okay, so let's answer it in the greenfield first, because that might well be where we want to eventually get to, depending upon what application we're modernizing. So depending upon the size of the organization, the type of application we're building and so on, like maybe we're approaching this from microservices perspective, or maybe it's just a small app that actually, you can start with a monolith and so on. But you might well start by going, actually, I can use .NET Core because the .NET framework isn't giving me enough benefit. I'm going to run that on containers because that's going to be able to scale up faster. I can have developers working on that better in an environment that's like production. So yeah, I think that also, if you're starting from scratch, like, would you really choose SQL Server? And there's kind of a couple of things about that. Like, so use the tools that your team are most familiar with is a great piece of advice for efficiency of getting things out the door quickly and being able to iterate quickly. But frankly, the cost of SQL Server licensing compared to some of those other databases like Postgres and MySQL, it's no more feature rich these days for SQL Server, I'd argue. Like, familiarity is certainly very useful, but at some point it may well be worth actually embracing these cheaper databases, or for that matter, going to something which is more radical, like a NoSQL solution. So do you really need to use a SQL database that will allow you to do lots of joins and complex things like that really justifies those the use of SQL? Or could you embrace something that's like be it a DynamoDB or Cassandra or MongoDB or whatever it is that seems most appropriate for that? There's a big learning curve to use those tools really well, but there's also a hell of a lot of advantages. You might also consider, like, actually, is function service, so Lambda, a good choice for that. So yeah, the use of .NET doesn't change, so your developers are still using that familiar set of tools. So if we then think about, like, how do you modernize, how do you get to that place, then again, it really depends upon what the future of your application is. How much effort and time do you want to put into this? How much investment do you want to put into your application? But if it's something you want to be able to release regularly and you expect to live for a long time, then yeah, you might well be looking at going, well, if I need to be upgrading the version of .NET I'm going to use anyway over time, why would I not also switch to .NET Core? That would allow me over time to potentially switch to containers. I would want to potentially make sure I'm not running VMs that with databases on. I'd want to hand over that responsibility to the cloud provider. So use RDS on AWS, so they would manage my SQL Server for me, which just takes so much administrative load off the team. And then there's, as you develop this further, like, you just have so many options to lean on those managed services. But let's focus in a good DevOps way on where are our pain points. Where do we want to actually like streamline things and get real value in terms of how quickly can we release or what's the reliability of our application and so on. So yeah, that modernization, you fix the things that are actually causing you pain first. That might well be your release process, or maybe you're really worried about reliability, so you're really looking at re-architecting for those purposes to make sure that instead of having these pets of VMs that like it was on-prem, that you're actually able to spin up new machines because you've just gone and automated the process for doing that. You've made sure there's no state sitting on the server. So many options for that modernization.
Yeah, thanks, Alad. John, you get the last word.
Yeah, thank you. I think my final point on this would be to return to something I mentioned earlier on, and that is, at AWS, we are a company, a community with our partners of builders. We are absolutely driven to help you as our customers build things quickly, efficiently, and without overhead. And when it comes to modernization of applications, we have a wide range of tools. No one tool will do everything. That's why there's so many of them. It's a very specialized area, but that's where working with Cloudsoft, you can choose the right tool for the right job. So we have a tool called App to Container, which will containerize and migrate your existing app and automatically generate a container image. We have a tool called Porting Assistant for .NET, which will help take a .NET Framework application to .NET Core. And then as we move forward from that, there are tools associated with moving SQL from Windows to Linux, a replatforming assistant. We have schema conversion tools. We have an AWS database migration service. So my summary would be, there are so many tools, so many options, so much flexibility in the AWS cloud that working with a partner like Cloudsoft will help you navigate that complexity, because it can be a complex sea to navigate, right? And because Cloudsoft have those specific Microsoft skills and competencies, they can help you choose the right tool for the right job. In fact, you don't even have to choose the tool. These guys know how to do it. So I think modernizing and migrating Microsoft workloads, we very much hope that this webinar has introduced you to some new things. Maybe it's confirmed some things you already know. Maybe it's caused you to sit back and think, crikey, I just didn't know any of this stuff. I need to investigate it more. And we hope it's all of those things. So, yep, that's where I would leave things for this evening. And hopefully that's useful and good use of your time.
Hear, hear. Thanks for that, John. And thanks to all of you as well. Thanks for giving up a chunk of your Wednesday evening to listen to us ramble on about cloud and Microsoft and fun technical subjects. So I hope you got some benefit from it. Thanks, Cale, for chipping a question into the Q&A. I hope it was answered during the course of the fireside chat. All that remains for me is to encourage you to reach out to Cloudsoft if there's anything you want to have a chat about. We're more than happy to have deep technical conversations about your technical problems. We enjoy that very much. And yeah, link in with myself and Alad or the company and follow us on Twitter. And keep an eye out for our 11th Cloud Pathway event, which will hopefully be in just a small number of weeks. So thanks again. I wish you all a very happy Wednesday evening, and we'll see you on the next. Take care.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.